Alright, Honkai Star Rail 3.4 has the best story that Hoyoverse has ever shown. And I want to reiterate the word I used there, shown. This wasn't an 8-hour story filled with bloated dialogue and boring scenes with characters standing in a circle. This wasn't a story that had random stuff strewn throughout it that was only there to pad time. This story was genuinely different. It was one that had exactly what I used to love about their older stories, which was a concise and direct plot that showed the player what it needed, with pretty much no unnecessary padding, all while keeping it extremely engaging. Except this time, it was even better than their old works. So let's talk about it. I've always been someone that's pretty critical of Hoyo in my videos, because while I enjoy their games a lot, I don't necessarily like the practices they follow in producing them. Because of this, when Hoyo does something wrong in my eyes, I'll be there to call them out on it, even if it doesn't necessarily change much. Hoyoverse games, and particularly HSR, absolutely have their problems, but on the other hand, I can't say that they don't have their good moments as well. I'm absolutely not opposed to giving them props for doing things right when they deserve it, and I just gotta say, they actually knocked the 3.4 story for Honkai Star Rail out of the park, so this is a scenario where they really do deserve it. I will say it wasn't perfect. I did have some gripes with it, which I'll get into later, but for the time being, let's talk about what they did right. For a little bit of context as to what a large part of my own and others' problems with the story have been since Amphorius launched, a lot of it had to do with how the story was presented or shown to the player. Like, even if the content of the story itself was great, the fact that the majority of it was told through characters standing in a circle while not moving around at all, bloated dialogue, black screens, and just a few cutscenes throughout didn't make it the most enjoyable thing to play, which is what most people are here for, a good gaming experience. At least for me, when the aforementioned stuff happened, it made it extremely easy for my mind to wander away from the story and the content itself, because the way it was being presented to me wasn't engaging enough for me to stay fully locked into it. But with 3.4, that all changed. Like, genuinely, I don't think I've been more locked into a story in any game I've played in a hell of a long time. Like, I went into it expecting it to be super long, and I honestly expected to do it in 2 parts, but literally from start to finish, I did not leave my chair. Pretty much every complaint about that presentation that I had, it was solved. The new area we were in was interesting and probably the most beautiful region in the game so far. There were plenty of different CG art pieces throughout the story to make the dialogue more interesting. They actually adjusted the model for a character in the story when it was relevant instead of just using the same one and forcing the player to imagine it themselves. The black screens? I mean, I went back through the entire thing and there was literally only one in the entire story, and it made sense in the context it was used in. All of this isn't even mentioning the unique camera angles that were used to make scenes feel more impactful, and the small bits you might not even notice, like showing you what cycle Kazlana is in as he approaches his friends to defeat them, and also how they depicted the different combat scenes to really add some oomph to what was really happening through boss fights and the special cutscenes. I mean, correct me if I'm wrong, but I'm pretty sure this cutscene during the Castoris fight isn't actually in the normal version of the fight, and they made it specifically for this scene, which is honestly a bit crazy on its own given how short the moment is. Stuff like this is so necessary to make scenes like this more impactful, and it's something that has been severely lacking in the previous patches of the game. Like, this was something that almost made it feel like a last stand for Castoris, and it's so nice to see that portrayed in this way, given how moments like this honestly wouldn't have been shown in the past at all. Like, let's be real for a moment here, if this scene was in any other previous patch before this, we'd get a black screen that says something like, Kazlana defeats Castoris and claims the core flame. He then moves on. But here, finally, a scene like this is actually shown to us, and we got to see a visual representation as to what was happening in the story. Like, now that I'm saying it out loud, it is wild to me that it took so long for us to even get that, but you know what? At least we've got it now, I guess. Even crazier, all those improvements to how the story was presented were bonuses on top of how good the story itself was, because that got significantly better in its own right too. One of my biggest personal complaints about the story in Amphorius as a whole, apart from the presentation, is that everything we were interacting with felt larger than life, in the sense that we as the player felt completely insignificant compared to what was going on around us. I felt that we as the player basically didn't have a real purpose or reason to be there, and we were basically acting as a glorified cameraman. I mean, hell, March literally gave us a camera before going into Amphorius, which felt more than a little bit on the nose given what has happened since, but in this patch, we finally found that purpose. Through Finon, or I guess Kazlana's story, we learned so much about the world we were on, and it took the story from one that felt larger than life to one that felt grounded and purposeful. Like Skrullum at the beginning of the 3.4 story explained what was going on with Amphorius in a direct and concise manner in literally under a minute. Let me repeat that. Under a minute. It just goes to show that Hoyo truly does not need fancy words and tons upon tons of exposition and all the extra stuff that Amphorius has previously had to make the player understand what's going on in their stories. Stuff can be simple and still engaging. Like, I don't need to know the entire backstory of how scepters came to be and get tons and tons of info on Aeons and the planet and Skrullum's mother and whatever else to realize, oh shit, this is actually huge news to finally have confirmed, and things are gonna get real from here. Really, I think what sold a lot of this patch was the tone of how it was told, which actually started in the previous patch with 3.3. Ever since the second half of 3.3 with Hyacine and Aquila, when things started to get more serious, things have felt properly paced. And with how dark the story was on paper, I could really feel how dark it was as the person playing through it. Like, this was basically a patch all about Kazlana's backstory, but everything that was shown to us made it easy to really feel the stakes that were at play with it. One mess up from Kazlana and one of those 33 million recurrences before we got there, I mean, the world is cooked and the Lord Ravager Iron Tomb gets released. And we actually got to see the toll that all those recurrences had on Kazlana at every step as he fell further and further into destruction. On top of that, something that helped sell it so much for me was Kazlana's song that played throughout it. Like, I don't think a music piece has hit that hard for all the right reasons in such a long time, and that's just yet another thing that I have to give Hoyo props for in this patch. At least for me, there was never a moment where I felt taken out of the story. Like, as I said earlier, I felt completely locked in the whole time because of that darker and more serious and focused tone. There were no stupid puzzles to solve or goofy moments that took away from the importance of different scenes. It was just a purely raw experience of learning what Kazlana went through, and seeing that as a player was genuinely awesome because it made the story actually feel focused. I am genuinely so happy that the story has turned around to the point where I can confidently say what I did at the beginning of this video. It was the best story that Hoyoverse has shown us yet, and coming off the back of how solid 3.3 was, I can really only hope that it continues to be good beyond this point. With that said, let's talk about some of the other stuff I mentioned earlier that I had a couple gripes or concerns with. Don't worry, it's actually not that much. So to get started, I think what I just mentioned is a definite concern of mine, and I think it's worth talking about. And it's my hope that the story continues to be presented in a similar way to this one. Like, in a worst case scenario, if we go back to the storytelling presentation that we saw in 3.0 or 3.1, I think all the goodwill they built up over the past couple patches will immediately get thrown out again. Now, granted, I don't think it's possible to be as bad as 3.0 was, but it is worth considering the fact that Finon or Kazlana, or in XP terms Kevin, is Hoyo's golden boy. I can actually see a world where this patch was so special because of how important he is to Hoyo themselves, and other patches may not reach the same tier as this one did. This is just a concern. I really don't think the story will ever get as bad as 3.0 was, but I also recognize that it might not reach the same heights as 3.4 did. Here's to hoping though, and I guess we'll just have to wait and see what happens with it. I also want to talk a little bit about the animation that played near the end of the story. First off, that animation was actually insane, and I'm glad we got it in the game because it was really cool to see and genuinely unexpected. But at least in my eyes, it took a lot of creative liberties that made it not necessarily confusing, but more so ambiguous, I guess? Like, since it released, you really can't browse any kind of social media relating to HSR without seeing at least a little bit of discourse over what was real and what was a part of the simulation of Amphorius in that animation. Personally, I don't think that's a good thing. Like, what was real there? What wasn't? Was Zephyrio actually there, or was he part of the simulation? What about Nanook? Did Kazlana actually destroy galaxies on the way to scratching Nanook? And furthermore, did he really even give him a scratch at all? Like, I feel some of those have a lot more obvious answers than others, but I can definitely see why people are confused about it, and I think they definitely could have done a better job of illustrating what was real in that section, and going forward, ideally at the start of 3.5, we get some kind of reference back to it to clarify for the people that, you know, don't go on YouTube and watch lore videos and stuff like that. Basically, this all boils down to the idea that while intrigue is nice to have in stories because you want to have talking points so that people can actually, discuss things, you don't want those same talking points to be so ambiguous that people get confused by them. Generally, there should be some cohesion in what is understood, and personally, I think in this case it could have been done a bit better. One last thing I want to mention is something I talked about in my video from a couple months ago, where the story doesn't feel like it's about the Trailblazer's journey anymore. Despite the story being as good as it was and the presentation improvements that we saw in it, I don't think it has changed enough yet to be free from that criticism. But with that said, I do think it's pretty obvious that going forward we'll return to the Express being the focus, with March 7th finally reaching Euphorius, the hints at both Dan Hang and Terravox being related to permanence, and also the Trailblazer taking on the role of the Deliverer. I really hope that they can continue on the good streak they've been having and not just turn around the story of Euphorius, but also bring us as the player and our companions back into relevance as we go forward. All in all, like I said, this was really a great story and I enjoyed my time playing through it. I think the craziest thing about this patch for me is that I actually was less excited about the 3.4 story than I was for the Fate collab, and that hasn't even happened yet. So this is really looking to be one of the best patches in the game, at least for me personally, and genuinely, I am so happy to be truly enjoying the game again. Before I end here, I want to mention that I'll be streaming later tonight at 9 PM Eastern to do a big rolling session for the Fate collab characters and also do stuff related to that, so feel free to drop by here on YouTube at the link in the description or on Twitch if you prefer that. Anyway, that's all my thoughts, and I appreciate you listening if you made it this far. I'd love to hear your thoughts on the patch, so feel free to leave a comment down below or join my Discord link down in the description to talk with me about it. As always, thank you so much for watching, subscribe, and if you haven't already, maybe give my other videos a shot too.